Welcome to this podcast about the importance of the Basque language for the unique Basque cultural identity. I will elaborate the importance of the Basque language for the collective identity of the Basques by looking at three different aspects. First, I will take a look at the importance of the Basque language for the Basque nationalist movement. Then I will look at its role for Basque students at Basque schools. After that, I will talk about the development of the ethnolinguistic movement in the Basque country, and then I will end this podcast with a short conclusion. Before I will discuss these points to elaborate the importance of the Basque language, I will start off with some general information about the language. The Basque language is also known as Euskara. It is a non-Indo-European language and is spoken in the northeast of Spain and the southwest of France on the shores of the Bay of Biscay. The whole Basque country is divided into three different state territories and administrative units, such as the continental Basque country in France and the charter community of Navarre, as well as the autonomous community of the Basque country in Spain. 2011, the population of the whole Basque country was about 2.6 million. The fifth sociolinguistic survey of 2011 has shown that 27% of the population aged 16 and over in the Basque country are bilingual, 14.7% are passive bilingual, and 58.3% are non-Basque speaking and have no knowledge of Euskara at all. The autonomous community of the Basque country is the territory with the biggest number of Basque speakers, as you can see on the image on the presentation slide. It shows how many Basque speakers there are in the different areas. Now I will continue with the relation of Euskara and Basque group identity. First, I will talk very briefly about the role of Euskara in the Basque nationalist movement before I come to speak about Euskara at schools. Cheng Feng Shi writes that the distinctive Basque cultural identity is essentially based on Euskara. The Basque language has also been important for political expression, especially for Basque nationalists. The Basque nationalist movement has been concerned about the preservation of their distinct identity. This identity has been threatened by assimilation pressures initiated by the cultural government for nation building. One indicator of the denationalization forced upon the Basque was the decreasing use of Euskara since the 16th century. There are two factors accountable for the declining use of the language. First, the deliberate policy of cultural assimilation, and second, the immigration of workers from other parts of Spain. So Euskara played an important role in the process of trying to destroy the cultural identity of the Basques, both for the government and for the Basque nationalists. Nationalists understood Euskara as a symbol and important reference of Basque collective identity. At the beginning of Basque nationalism over a century ago, descent was more important than language. Only later on, Basque became the focal point of Basque nationalism. But with increased immigration from southern Spain, it became necessary that there was a change from, how Conversi calls it, ascriptive criteria of membership to non-ascriptive ones. Even though the focus of the nationalists shifted, it is argued that a civic definition of Basque cultural identity was widely spread. Also more recently, the discourses of Basque nationalism on the nation and national identity have been pushing Euskara as the exclusive foundation of national identity in the background. So the importance of Euskara for Basque nationalism has decreased again. Research by Begoña Echeverria has shown, however, that in 2003, schools defined Basque identity primarily in linguistic terms. I will now talk about the importance of Euskara for students in the Basque country by looking at the situation at schools in the Basque autonomous community. As just said, schools defined Basque identity primarily in linguistic terms. She refers to this discourse as ethnolinguistic pedagogy. Textbooks, for example, emphasize the importance of Euskara to Basque identity by describing it as our, respectively their language, and Spanish as just one of many languages. She also gives two examples of famous Basque writers who state their opinion regarding this topic. Javier Amuriza from Vizcaya writes, "We are Basques. What would the Basque country be if it loses its language too?" And Itzaro Bordia, a female writer from Zubrua, writes, "We aren't indebted to anyone. Basque is our language. All of us Basques need to know and transmit Basque." So the tone of textbooks at schools and the utterances of the two famous Basque writers show once again that for many Basques, Euskara is a core element of Basque identity. The link between Euskara and the Basque country is also made explicit in textbooks of Spanish medium schools. A question that rises now is whether Spanish school students perceive the link between language and identity in the same way as Basque school students do. Another study by Echeverria provides an answer to that question. She has made a field study at schools in San Sebastian in which she examined the understanding of ethnic identity of the students there. After the Civil War, the Franco government made great effort to suppress any manifestation of Basque culture. So between 1937 and the early 1950s, public use of Euskara was prohibited. With the founding of clandestine schools in the 1960s, efforts to revitalize Euskara had begun. These schools were the precursor of the educational system today. Nowadays, students can choose among three linguistic models. They can choose whether they want to be instructed in Spanish, Basque, or both. Echeverria examined the difference in the perception of ethnic identity for the Spanish and Basque instructed students. She came to the conclusion that the Basque school students are more likely to speak Basque and to consider Basque key to Basque identity. Spanish school students, on the other hand, are more likely to claim bi-ethnic identities based on territory. But why was there such a big difference in perception? Besides the different language of instruction, they also differed from each other in other important ways. First, they also differed in the language spoken at home. As you can see on table 1 and 2, 78% of Basque school children lived in Basque only or bilingual households, whereas only 23% of Spanish school students did. The second difference between the groups of students is their parents' place of origin. 81% of Spanish school students had at least one parent who wasn't born in the Basque autonomous community. In comparison, only 28% of Basque school children did. So all these differences might have an influence on the different importance of language in the perception of Basqueness. Euskara might not be the core element of Basque identity for everyone, even though many people, including Basque nationalists, seem to give the Basque language great importance regarding the development of a group identity. Factors like territory and place of birth and place of living might still be more important for others. Another very interesting example is the one Echeverria gives when she talks about her own experiences. She is the daughter of Basque immigrants to California. Even though Basque is her first language, she grew up in a community where many children of Basque immigrants did not speak Basque. She states, however, that these people identified strongly as Basque. This led her to problematize the notion that there was a straightforward relationship between ethnicity and language. This shows once more that people with different backgrounds and education might evaluate the importance of language for their identity differently. I will now talk about the development of the ethnolinguistic movement in the Basque country. This movement is important for this podcast for two reasons. First, because it was initially linked to the nationalist movement, and second, because of its importance for both the language itself and its speakers. With its aim to revitalize and strengthen the language, it has a big influence on the speakers of the Basque language. Throughout its long existence, the ethnolinguistic movement has had to adapt to changing social and political conditions. It has also undergone considerable processes of institutionalization as well as professionalization. In its beginnings, the movement for the Basque language was, as already mentioned, closely linked to the revival of the nationalist movement that began in the late 1950s. For Basque nationalists, Euskara was a symbol and core element of Basque identity. This added political value to the language. Because of its strong symbolic and identity value, the ethno-linguistic movement had broad social support. Favorable was also that the movement's discourse was in tune with other anti-government movements and political forces. After Franco's regime, there were two laws introduced in the 1980s. These were the first regulatory frameworks in the linguistic field. The 1982 law gave Euskara, together with Spanish, official status in the autonomous community. However, the Spanish constitution regulates that any citizen is obligated to have knowledge of Spanish. The second law, the Law of Navarre, divides the territory of the Chartered Community of Navarre into three linguistic zones: a Basque-speaking zone, a mixed zone, and a zone where no Basque is spoken. So Basque only has co-official status in one of these zones. More recently, the ethno-linguistic movement has taken a turn. Larrinaga and Amurio write that in the words of members of the movement, Euskara should be an element of union, and it has therefore been necessary to build agreements over and above political ideologies or partisan options. That means that language is reinterpreted as the most important patrimony of all those who speak it, regardless of socio-political conditions. The aim of the movement became the conquest of the microspaces of daily life. The movement no longer considers the symbolic addition to the language to be sufficient. It focuses instead on the real linguistic practice that is materialized by the speaker in everyday communication. So the movement started to focus more on the actual speakers of the language. The Sociolinguistic Survey of 2011 shows that there has been an increase in knowledge of Euskara. Unfortunately, this increase does not apply to the social use of the language. Also, family transmission has weakened, so the effort made in education has proven insufficient. Larrinaga and Amuria state that one of the demands currently expressed by many of the movement's organizations is the creation of monolingual social enclaves that enable a normalized reproduction of the Basque language. They say that will probably constitute one of the main challenges in coming years. Now we have seen how the ethnolinguistic movement developed to its recent state. In the beginning, when the ethnolinguistic movement had been closely linked to the nationalist movement, the emphasis on Euskara as the core referent of Basque identity played a more important role. This has changed because the political value of Euskara has become less important, and the focus shifted to the Basque speakers itself. Now I will end this podcast with a short conclusion. It has shown that in many sections of Basque culture, the Basque language plays an important role for the perception of Basque cultural identity. It played an important role for the Basque nationalist movement, which strongly emphasized the importance of Euskara for the Basque identity. In more recent years, however, the importance of Euskara for Basque nationalism has decreased. The focus shifted again to more civic definitions of Basque identity. Also, Spanish school students in San Sebastian seem to connect Basque identity more with territoriality than with the Basque language. In contrast to Basque school students who strongly define their Basqueness through Euskara. The individual backgrounds of the students seem to have had a big influence on the subjective perception of Basque identity. Like for the Basque nationalist movement, the focus of the ethnolinguistic movement has changed as well. Euskara as the core referent of Basque identity has shifted into the background. Nowadays, the movement focuses more on the speakers themselves and tries to strengthen the use of Euskara from bottom to top. So the conclusion of this podcast is that Euskara plays an important role for Basque cultural identity. To what degree, however, depends very much on the individual backgrounds of the different people living in the Basque country. Regarding the movements that are connected to Euskara, there seems to be a trend to abandon the idea that the Basque language is the single most important element of Basque cultural identity. But even though it might not be the most important element anymore, it definitely remains important, especially for its speakers. This is the end, and thank you very much for listening to this podcast.